Esports are a very significant part of video game culture. With over 71 million people worldwide watching esports in 2013 alone, and the global esports market generating over $325 million of revenue in 2015, there's no denying the fact that esports strongly influence the gaming industry as a whole. I just thought that needed to be said before I go any further in the video because people look at the title and think that I'm just esports and think that esports are terrible. That's not the case. I think that people who are in the competitive gaming scene should be acknowledged and should be commended for their accomplishments. I'm not arguing against that. I just personally do not like the name esports because when I think of a sport, I think of a competitive game that involves something athletic. So, for example, football, baseball, basketball, hockey, those kind of sports that involve teamwork and you have to reach a certain goal and it's athletic. These are athletic games. That's what a sport is. I don't think that NASCAR and IndyCar and Formula One and those other kind of motorsports should be considered actual sports because you don't have to be an athlete to be a NASCAR driver. You don't have to be an athlete to pick up a controller and play competitively for CSGO. So that's why I don't agree with the name esports. I think competitive gaming or even professional gaming, because these people make a ton of money off of what they do, I think that's a more suitable name for this sort of thing. I don't think that esports is an okay terminology. I just made that the title of my video because it's more recognizable and people know what I'm talking about. I don't necessarily agree with the name esports. I don't think that esports are real sports, and some people are going to disagree with me, but it's just the truth. Same with anything else that doesn't involve athletics and isn't a competition. Those are the two requirements for something to be a sport. It has to be athletic, and it also has to be a competition. That's why UFC and boxing, they are sports because it's a competition. It doesn't involve teamwork, but it's still competitive. If you're jogging down the street and getting some cardio in, that's not a sport. But if you're running track against people, then it's a sport. While esports do have the competitive aspect of what makes a sport, but there's no athletics involved at all in playing video games, unless I guess there's a competitive scene for Wii Fit or something like that, then okay, maybe you could call it a sport, maybe. But for the most part, video games aren't athletic at all. They really aren't. So that's why I don't agree with the term esports. I know there will be a lot of people who do not agree with what I have said, but it needs to be said because I just think it's flat out ridiculous to put competitive gamers in the same conversation as actual athletes. And this is coming from someone who does a lot of gaming, who plays a lot of video games, and isn't really a huge sports fan, but I am at least able to recognize the difference between the two. But that was just a small pet peeve of mine. There's a specific topic that I want to talk about, and that is, of course, whether or not esports are actually ruining gaming to an extent. Now, before you hit the dislike button, before you leave comments about how stupid I am, about how horrible I am for saying such a thing, hear me out, okay? I've been playing games online for a very long time. Since the 6th generation of consoles, I've been playing online games. And something I've noticed is that ever since esports have become popular and have become, I guess you could say, mainstream, at least in the realm of gaming, I've noticed that online gaming has also drastically changed, not just for the competitive gamer, but for all gamers. Now, to some people, that might sound like a pretty extreme statement to make, that competitive gaming, to an extent, can negatively affect all gamers and their experience. To some people, that might sound completely ludicrous. Where are you getting this from? Well, besides the fact that there's so many more tryhards after esports became mainstream, that's one aspect of it, right? Esports have become so huge and mainstream now that you have so many people trying to emulate the popular competitive players and try to be like them, which causes more tryhards to be found in lobbies. Now, to some people, this may seem like a very insignificant effect that esports have had in the industry, but it actually is very significant if you think about the fact that playing competitively, while there's nothing wrong with that, in theory, it kind of ruins the fun factor because video games are supposed to be fun after all. That's really the main purpose of playing a video game, is to have fun. Am I wrong? So that's one aspect of esports that I think are ruining gaming to an extent, because we have this culture now that values competitiveness and values competition and values winning over anything else. And if you just focus on winning and you focus on kicking everyone's ass or beating everybody in a game, then you're kind of forgetting the main purpose of playing a video game. You're not really having fun if you're too focused on being competitive. But that's just one aspect of esports and competitive gaming that I think has a negative impact on the industry and the community as a whole. I know to some it might not seem like a big deal, but if you really think about it, you're kind of creating a culture that's completely ignoring the original purpose of video games in the first place, which is first and foremost to have fun. But there's actually an even bigger problem that competitive gaming and esports are actually creating. Since the rise of popularity of esports, you've been seeing an upward trend of games focusing heavily on esports and catering heavily to the MLG community. One game that I can think of from the top of my head is an upcoming game, Quake Champions. You look at the trailer of the game, you look at all the interviews and all the gameplay footage, Bethesda clearly states that a lot of their gameplay mechanics are made with competitive gaming in mind, that they're totally focused on competitive gaming and the competitive scene. That's why they made Quake Champions. That's why the mechanics of Quake Champions are there, is to cater to the MLG pro gamer community. Now, some people might be wondering, how is that a problem, NoobTube? What's the problem with that? Well, it's quite simple, actually. Yes, the MLG scene is really hot right now. There's so much buzz going around competitive gaming. It's become a mainstream part of video game culture. So, in theory, you would think that it would be smart business-wise for Bethesda to design a game specifically made for the Major League gamers, except there's one problem with that. The reason why MLG is so huge is because there's a significant number of people who get enjoyment out of watching people play competitively on Twitch. Keyword watch. Now, I'm not going to be a Jimmy Kimmel here and say that it's stupid to watch other YouTubers or other streamers, because that would be pretty stupid coming from someone who does gameplay videos and talks about video games and has people that watches my gameplay. So it would be stupid for me to say that it's stupid to watch other people. That's not the point I'm trying to get at. The point I'm trying to get at is that it's pretty stupid to have a game specifically designed for competitive players when most of the money from MLG comes into watching other people play the game, not necessarily buying the game specifically. So the thing about Call of Duty is that Call of Duty has a huge competitive scene, but it's also popular among casuals. You have a mixture between casual players and competitive players all playing the same game. That's a different story than, let's say, Quake Champions, which is completely built and caters specifically to competitive gamers, which is a problem because casual gamers or just people who play games just to have fun and don't care about this competitive aren't going to buy the game. I don't expect that Quake Champions is going to be a huge multi-million-dollar success, especially since it will only be available on one platform, but mainly because it's only catering to MLG professional gamers and doesn't really have the general consumer in mind, which usually doesn't translate well in game sales. You might have a lot of buzz about your game with people watching competitive gamers, but people don't actually want to play the game if it has mechanics that are only designed for MLG gamers, which is really bad for the average gamer. And keep in mind, this is coming from someone who absolutely despises skill-based matchmaking and doesn't think that it should be in any video game. So I'm pretty much down the middle when it comes to the whole competitive versus fun factor. I do think that competitive gaming should exist. It has its place in the gaming industry, for sure. I'm not saying that it shouldn't exist. That's not the message I'm trying to bring out in this video. But I don't think that we should value competition over fun. And when developers implement features in a game that are specifically catering to the minority of gamers, that's obviously not good. And there's something wrong with that. I think the best way to handle competitive gaming versus regular gaming is to have player matches and ranked matches. Overwatch does it, sports games do it like UFC, and other games do it, and it works pretty well. If you don't want to be bothered with the ranking bullshit, then you don't have to. But keep in mind, you know, back in the MW2 days, when there were so many tryhards, and there still are tryhards in Call of Duty, but the reason why there were so many tryhards back then is because, you know, you had these big YouTubers that were talking about how good they were at the game, and you saw crazy gameplays, tactical nukes, and everything. And we had so many people trying to emulate them, which creates, you know, problems. It made the game less fun to a degree. You had everybody trying so hard, camping in corners, trying to get that nuke, and it you know, that's what happens when people are too competitive. It kind of makes the game less fun if you're just camping in a corner and just trying to get kill streaks and trying to get a nuke. So I like it when games have regular player matches and ranked playlists for people who are extremely competitive. I think that's fine. But if you're going to have both in one lobby, or even if you do have it separately, where you have regular matches and player and ranked matches, regardless, skill-based matchmaking should not be a thing. I don't like being given the illusion that I'm actually good at the game when I'm not. It's just skill-based matchmaking is on, so I'm not doing as bad as I typically would if there wasn't skill-based matchmaking. Both are two extremes. The extreme where you have developers babying the consumer, and the other extreme where you have it just way too competitive that it's not fun anymore. Both are really bad. I'm not just picking on esports. I think both are really bad and should not be implemented. It only becomes a serious problem when you only cater to a small minority of players and ignore the rest. That's when I have a huge problem with it. But let me know what you guys think about what I've said during this video. If you agree, disagree, just let me know. I think it's an interesting discussion to have. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you guys later.